Hello, Fishkama, and welcome to the first of several weekly future-proof webinars. If you're watching a recording of this, we are running a webinar every Friday in April at 12:30 British Summer Time. Same place, same time each week. The purpose of this webinar is to expand on a lot of themes and topics that we touched on in this week's episode of Future Proof. So if you haven't watched that, check out the recording on our YouTube channel. And just a heads up, the format for today will be a pretty standard Q&A. I'm going to ask our guest a few questions and then open the floor to anyone on the call. So if you've got some questions, just put them in the chat for us. Now, today we're very, very lucky to be joined by Nasim Asl, a senior political journalist with Full Fact, who's previously worked on BBC Question Time and BBC Scotland. Full Fact is one of the UK's most important fact-checking agencies, and they're actually one of our partners for this project, so we're really excited to be working with them. Like us, they're also keeping an eye on the 2026 Holyrood elections, so be sure to check them out at their website, fullfact.org, or follow them on their socials. So to start us off, Nasim, how are you doing today?
I'm good. Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me. I know Mark and our public affairs team are really excited about this partnership, so happy I could be here.
We're all really excited ourselves. It's been the talk of the coffee and biscuits every morning. For those unfamiliar watching this, would you be able to tell us a little bit about your role, what Full Fact is, and what a day looks like for you?
Yep, of course. So put very simply, Full Fact is a charity that focuses on fact checking. So we are registered with the Charity Commission. We're a team of independent journalists. We've got fact checkers. We have a fundraising team. We've got our own sort of AI tools and our own AI guys who do a job that I would not be able to do and build these incredible tools that are used by fact checkers around the world. And our sort of raison d'etre, if you like, is to build a better information environment. And we are really focused on that. We really want to build trust and restore trust in not just politicians, but also the UK's democratic institutions. We believe that facts matter. That's like sort of one of our mottos. And we know that bad information can ruin lives. So we're really focused with combating that. And that isn't just, health misinformation, which we do see a lot of. It's also misinformation that, might target people online, especially, and might result in them buying products that they wouldn't usually, and given like financial information over to bad actors, if you will. But it's also the wider thing of we see a lot of claims that alleged politicians have done or said things that they haven't done, which erodes, I guess, especially in election time, a wider trust in politicians. We see politicians themselves sometimes making claims that aren't accurate, which then can impact the way that people vote. So that's what we want to tackle basically is this fear of bad information, of false information, of people who don't really think that facts matter anymore, and
Mm.
this erosion of truth and trust. Um,
Can I ask, how do you find misinformation? Because I know one of the really challenging things about social media is that everybody's feeds are algorithmic and very individual. So I don't really know what my parents are watching. They could be in a different media sphere to me. So does Full Fact rely more on tips, or do you try and create a sort of genetic social media feed?
we have like a huge range. So it's essentially we try and
Mm.
cast the net out as wide as we can and see what comes back. So we, as a team of editorial, I think there's about 8 or 9 of us. We we go out there looking for it sometimes. Sometimes it's not as obvious as you think. And you're right, sometimes, especially on social media, it doesn't present itself to us. There's been a lot of
Mm.
times, over the weekend, I'll be on Facebook or, Instagram or something, and I'll see something my algorithm has given me that I know is false. So I just take a screenshot and then deal with that on Monday. But we look in a range of places. So we do look on social media. Some of that is using specific tools that are designed to cut through the algorithm. We wouldn't just go on, necessarily our own personal accounts and just look at our own home feeds to see what is there. We do like really targeted searches for that. Our own AI tools that our team has built incorporate social media into that sometimes. So we're able to use keywords and searches, and some things get flagged to us via that way. We have our own social media channels, so sometimes people who follow us or people who don't even follow us will just tag us in something and just be like, "Can you look at this?" And then we're obviously, monitoring our own channels, so we see that. We look at newspapers, we look at interviews politicians do, we look at blogs online. Receive a lot of we see a lot of claims that way, and then like I was saying, our AI tools don't just deal with social media; they also deal with these sources, like things with an RSS feed. So we're able to do it that way. And yeah, the tools that we've got and we've built over the years are brilliant. So it they can flag to us things that just humans wouldn't have the capacity to go through all of this stuff. So it can flag um, a line from a newspaper article and say like, oh, this might be worth looking at. And then one of us
Hmm.
will actually go in and look at it. It'll flag, and say in Hansard in Parliament, somebody's made a repeat claim that we've already written about and we've kind of inputted into the system. It'll flag that match for us. So we're able to find things that way. But yeah, I don't think there's no easy way to kind of quantify how much of it is us seeing our own stuff or how much is tip offs. But yeah, it's a bit of both. But obviously,
It's a
we just can't cover
never-ending
everything.
task either way.
Yeah, absolutely mammoth task.
One of our correspondents, Emily, is making a video on bots on social media and just sort of fake accounts and stuff. Does any of your work involve sort of identifying bots as a source of misinformation, or is it more just about the claims themselves?
Yeah, I think we're more about the claims themselves, to
Right,
be
okay.
honest. I know there are organizations that do, and academics that do some of that work where they try and track down the source of it. And
Mm.
one of our journalists a couple of years ago did a really amazing piece actually on something we'd seen a lot of on social media, which was the so-called hoax posts. And these were posts that for a good few months, maybe like a year, we were seeing in various Facebook groups, but for specific communities. So, there might be like a Glasgow South Side group, and a post would come in and it would be like, oh, my daughter has gone missing. Here's a photo of her. If anybody sees her, let me know. One in Edinburgh might be like, oh, my cat's gone missing. If anybody sees her, we would see posts being like, oh, they have found a toddler at the side of the road. Here's a photo of it. Please share this and get them found. But these were copy and paste jobs. And
Right.
we saw examples of pretty much the exact same wording with just like the place name changed in dozens and dozens of groups, community Facebook groups around the world. And we were able to sort of trace back the sources of some of the images. And we would get in touch with local police departments and they'd be like, well, we've got no record of this. This isn't a thing. And one of our journalists, Tony Thompson, did a really long, really interesting dive into this and try to track it back to its source. Because quite often we would find posts like that once they'd been shared a bunch by people that had the really good intentions at their heart, thinking, "Oh gosh, I need to help this poor child," or "Let's try and find this dog." Um, People would then edit the posts, whoever had originally posted them, um, to to promote products or to link to websites and stuff like that.
Uh,
So some of that might have been bot work, some of it was obviously human designed. But yeah, it's just an interesting way where you would maybe think that's a bot, but actually the fact people were going in and editing it suggests that there was
mm,
something more, some more control over it than just a kind of like
mhm.
automated system, if you like.
I suppose that's one of the dangers of social media, the ability to sort of retrospectively edit what the actual claim that you're putting out there. Feels very, very Orwellian.
Yeah, it's quite helpful, I think, now, to be honest, that some platforms allow you to see an edit history. Um,
Aye, aye, true.
but I don't think
Is
a lot of
that
people necessarily use that. I don't,
is
I
that
certainly don't check the edit history of every single thing I see online, unless, I'm doing it for work or whatever.
which platforms are you able to edit on, and which can you check the edit history for? Do you know? Or,
You can check for Facebook, I'm pretty sure.
oh, okay,
I think X might have started it. I could be wrong, but I think X might have that feature now. But on Facebook,
okay,
you can edit posts, but I'm sure, but I know you can then check the edit history and see the original version of a post and then like the new version of it and stuff.
okay. Well, that's a good tip for anyone on Facebook. Always check if there's an edit history. Um,
And with all this, with all the misinformation you've looked at, I'm curious to know what are some of the most common trends you've noticed among these false claims you've found?
So if we're looking at if we just take social media, for example, because obviously a lot of the work we do is also politics focused in the UK, but social media is kind of its own beast. Um, so that's really interesting because like those hoax posts I was talking about, there was definitely a trend maybe a year and a half ago where they felt kind of relentless. And then last summer we noticed a new trend, which was um, these sort of AI generated videos that we saw on TikTok and we saw on Facebook, quite often the same video just posted across multiple platforms, which were alleging that people's personal freedoms were at threat. So, some of these posts would be things like, oh, it's going to be illegal to hang your washing outside at night now. Things that are categorically not true. Um, and there was a few of those kind of popping up, and it just felt a bit like whack-a-mole. We were trying to deal with them, and then more kept coming. And then we've kind of just anecdotally noticed that at the minute they've really quietened down. Like they might still be there, but we're just, not finding them as much, or whoever was behind them has maybe changed tact. So that trend has disappeared. But a new trend that I feel like we've noticed in the last maybe month or two is social media posts, which again seem to be like AI generated, or at least use AI generated images that are alleging that things happened in Parliament that didn't. And those are actually like really straightforward to check because Parliament in like the UK Parliament has this thing called Hansard, which is a record of everything that is said in Parliament. And there's also live feeds of it. So it's really easy to just like check an individual member of Parliament's record, or, do a really targeted search to be like, were these words said? And they have not been said. But yeah, it's just interesting the way those sort of trends come. And, I couldn't speak to why these things are changing, or who's behind them, or who's deciding, now we're going to produce these parliamentary stuff. But especially in election years, and I know obviously like the UK doesn't have a general election at the minute. It's like local elections in England, it's Scotland and Wales where there are parliamentary elections. It does like kind of feed into that degradation of trust in these institutions and in these politicians, that we're trying to combat as a charity. And then wider sort of societal trends, I think, in terms of issues that are cropping up and that people seem to, the public at least, seem to really care about in polling and things.
Hmm.
on that note, are you seeing any misinformation and disinformation popping up for the 2026 Scottish elections already, or have you not seen much?
I've not seen a lot personally, to be honest. Not at least
Okay,
in this scale where it's um like sort of these AI generated, really like
that that's
categorically
more
false
UK
claims.
Parliament,
Yeah, that seems I've not
right?
seen any saying like, oh, in Holyrood, this MSP and that MSP said these things. I've not seen those claims yet. It's not to say they don't exist. If they do, and you've seen them, please let me know. But we just haven't come across them
I'll
yet.
send you a tip.
Yeah, like honestly, please do. We do actually have a WhatsApp. This is probably a good time to plug it. We've got a WhatsApp tip line that we've set up for this local election period. So that's Scottish elections, Welsh elections, and the English local elections, where we're encouraging people to, just fire us a message on WhatsApp. And I think
And
you can
you can
call.
find that on fullfact.org.
Yes, that should be at the top of our website. Yeah, because like I was saying, we're only so many people. We can't have
Mhm.
eyes on everything, so it's really helpful for us to get sources for this and for people to give us a nod. Yeah.
Something I was
Um,
wondering. Oh, sorry, you like Ravi or
no, 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 go for it,
yeah,
Tom.
I'm Tom, by the way. So obviously, social media is quite a fast, responsive thing. So obviously, if someone impulsively shares a post, which they then find out later to be misinformation, is there any advice you can give them how to address that? Do they put a post to their family and friends to look, I've shared something I found out isn't true, or
Um, that's a really good question. I mean, I'm speaking from a purely personal perspective here because I don't think we necessarily have a line we would take. I think it depends who you are. So we always encourage, for example, politicians we see who share things online that aren't true or are factually incorrect to issue corrections. We've got like an entire sort of campaign about that, and that's been quite successful. You know, we've managed to get Hansard politicians able to change the record in Parliament as part of that. But when it comes to social media, I would probably just encourage people to unshare it. I guess it depends how harmful it is. You know, like people will know themselves how harmful something is to their relationships online with family or friends or whatever. So I think the main thing is to try and get rid of the false information. So, you know, for example, if I'd shared something, I would unshare it. I wouldn't necessarily like issue my own personal correction or statement about it, but I wouldn't want it still up on my own personal accounts. But that's why we always encourage people, you know, we've got toolkits to help people spot misinformation online. And we always encourage people to think really critically about posts that they see online. A lot of mis and disinformation disinformation specifically is designed to provoke emotional reactions in people with the claims. Typically outrage, or like I was talking about those hoax posts where it was trying to trigger an emotional reaction. So people share things really quickly. But yeah, we always encourage people to think critically about what they're sharing, even images and videos now, to watch them carefully, to notice if there's any discrepancies in them, to see if they can find their own sources for information that they're sharing before they share it. Because you're right, it's so easy to just click share and for something to pop up, but the harm that it can cause is actually it's actually quite high depending on the claim itself.
On that note, not necessarily for the people sharing mis or disinformation, but the people actually producing it, are there any real consequences? Do you alert the authorities or?
Again, very good question. I don't know. It depends
Oh,
who
okay,
it
fair.
is. So again, like I was saying with politicians, we get in touch with the politicians, we encourage them to unshare it. It's not necessarily a crime as far as I know, but
Mhm.
it does erode this kind of trust. I suppose that kind of thing would depend on the images used. You know, if somebody's personal image is being used, and the government seems to be doing a lot of work on, you know, counteracting deepfakes and things like sexually explicit deepfakes specifically, then that
Mhm.
would veer more into criminal action at some point, possibly. But yeah, I'm not entirely sure on that one. Sorry.
I was
Actually,
wondering
on the
if you
topic of, oh,
do
sorry.
you want to go? Or okay, I was just wondering if you could maybe expand a little on some of the ways that misinformation can cause direct harm when it's like spread.
Yep, of course. So probably like the most clear and obvious example of that is health misinformation. So we saw a lot of that, for example, during the COVID-19 pandemic. So people making false and inaccurate claims online about vaccines, about the harms that they alleged vaccines cause, about symptoms of diseases, things like that. We still do see some false claims that are health related, you know, that veer more into, oh, this specific thing can treat cancer or what have you. So that there's a clear claim harm correlation with examples like that. We see other types of claims that veer more into political issues, which, like I was saying, cause harm in a more subtle sense, and maybe not a sense that's always easy to quantify or to directly pinpoint. It just feeds into this wider degradation of trust that I was talking about. And that can be, we often see claims about politicians themselves. So, you know, social media posts, for example, that say like, oh, politicians are entitled to X, Y, and Z, or get one that we see quite often is like, oh, former prime ministers get this really specific pension for life. Um, and people, you know, share that. People have their own, it becomes quite a cyclical thing where when people are more unhappy with politics or unhappy with their representation, politicians become an easier figure in like the really brand theoretical sense of misinformation, because it's easier to dislike them or dislike the institutions they stand for or whatnot. So like claims like that then harm, which are incorrect, then harm people's
Hmm.
trust because it makes it almost feeds people's misconceptions or their own sort of prejudices in some sense. And that's not just about politicians. We see that in a range of other topics as well. And from both sides, both sides of the political spectrum, we see claims that are doing that sort of harm.
Does it appear that a lot of claims in the past year are becoming increasingly AI generated? Has sort of AI slop really increased your workload?
Yes, yes and no. So it's interesting because it's obviously been the last like what 2 years, maybe two and a bit years, since Gen AI became so accessible. We've definitely noticed a huge rise in the number of AI produced claims we're looking at. Yeah, it's really interesting because in some ways the AI has gotten better. So when people were first doing a lot of like Gen AI images and things, I think one of the very first examples of this was like the Pope in a huge puffer jacket, which you wouldn't like, that's not an image that causes harm in like a sense, but people believing that that kind of image blurs the line, I think, for a lot of people in like what is true and what is not true. And that was, a fun image. That was, I think, one of the very early examples we saw of it. But I think that the technology's gotten better. So I think we're seeing less, or at least I'm seeing from my own personal perspective, less Gen AI images where somebody's got like 7 fingers, or like the hands just have no definition. It used to be more sort of straightforward with images to be able to tell straight away, like that's obviously AI. Sometimes now it's a bit harder. And I think some platforms are trying to help out with that. So Google, for example, has its own AI tools, but it's like images that are either created with or edited with Google AI contain something called a synth ID watermark. So if you, and yeah, this is only like Google tools. So we might see an image and try and figure out where it came from or whatever. And we'll do a reverse image search on it. And if it's an image search done with Google and the image was edited or created with Google's AI tools, it will tell us when you click like about this image, it just says this contains this watermark. So we know AI has been involved somewhere in the process. So we are seeing that more and more, I think.
Just for anyone watching this who might be unfamiliar with a reverse image search, can you give a quick overview of how you might do that?
Yeah, so there's a few tools that do it. Again, we've got like a toolkit on our website where we link to loads of them, and you can even get like a plugin for your browser where you can sort of just do it organically as you're going. But it essentially takes an image and tries to find the earliest examples or other matching examples of it on the internet. So Google's reverse image search is fairly straightforward. Like the Google homepage has an image tab, and then you just go onto that. There's kind of a search bar for it, and then it just says like, oh, paste a link to or upload your image here. So you just kind of plop your image in, and then
So not a little, it's like a little camera icon, I think.
Yeah, like a sort of like grayscale camera icon. And then it just like pings back a list. Sometimes, like depending on the image though, it obviously doesn't always produce an exact result. And there are other things like TinEye is another one that does it. I think Bing has one as well. Like I was saying, we've got a list on our site with full sources, and when I'm using it, I use the plugin, so it automatically just like scans loads of different sites for me. Yeah, depending on the image, it doesn't always come up with like a really good match, but it's very useful sometimes in finding edited images. So an example we saw, and this isn't necessarily an AI image, I don't think this contained the watermark from memory, but in the 2022 World Cup, which is crazy, that was 4 years ago, Labour politicians posted a photo of, I think Keir Starmer might have been there. Well, Keir Starmer definitely was there, maybe Rachel Reeves and a couple of other sort of, at that time, shadow cabinet members posted a video on Twitter, it might have been known as then X, of themselves watching an England game in the World Cup, and they were just like in an office, and then we saw that photo online in the following weeks where Jimmy Savile had been edited into the image. so when we saw claims being like, oh, look, here's, a photo of Keir Starmer with Jimmy Savile, it was really straightforward to reverse image search that particular photo. And even though obviously the original version did not have Jimmy Savile in it, enough of the image was the same, it was able to come back and be like, oh, well, this is where this image came from. And it was posted on X, and here's the original version of it. It also works for videos. So stills from videos, we use it like image search, reverse search as a tool quite often, because we see a lot of miscaptioned videos around conflict. Around conflicts and natural disasters, we really see a lot of videos being shared, and people are saying, oh, this video shows an explosion on this bridge, and it actually was taken 6 years before and shows an explosion on a bridge somewhere else in the world. Or, oh, this video shows a missile strike, but actually it shows an explosion in a factory that happened like 4 years previously. And again, that can be really tricky to know, because why would people doubt that? And especially if, like, people aren't speaking, we find if people aren't speaking English in the video and the languages people are speaking match, and you're not a native speaker of those languages, you don't necessarily know what those people are saying, and translation tools don't always help with that. But yeah, it works really well with stills from videos, which is very helpful for us, because there's so many videos and so many images online. It really helps us pinpoint the origins of some of them, at least.
On the topic
That's
of
great.
generative AI and deepfakes, obviously technology is only going to get better to a point where it's going to be hard to tell the difference between what's real and not. So what's to stop bad actors like politicians, even if it's a true video, them saying, "No, it's just a deep fake or generative AI"? How can we hold them to account?
Um, that's a really interesting question. I think it's a lot of videos of politicians, for example. It would be a case of finding evidence. So if the video was filmed from another angle, or it was a newscast, or its original source was an organization like Reuters or the BBC, it's that's just a fact then that this video was. So they can say what they want in response to it in theory, but if the evidence is there and the facts are there, then that's fine. So I mean, from a personal level, I wouldn't quite know where to start with that, to be honest. I suppose it's just, I think that's why we find it so important to be doing this kind of job, because we're constantly speaking to politicians to try and get them to do things like correct the record or correct misleading claims they've made, because we think that that trust has to start from the ground up. So quite often we get accused is probably not the right word, but we'll pick up something, a claim, and people go like, oh, that's really picky, like they clearly misspoke or whatever. But that's kind of the point, is we want politicians to be able to hold themselves to account as well, to put their hands up and be like, oh yeah, you know what, actually I got this stat wrong, or I used the wrong source for this, or these figures are outdated. Because from a personal perspective, that's what we think our politicians should be doing. They should be upholding these democratic basic principles, and they shouldn't be muddying the waters with them. Yeah.
Should is the operating principle there.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just with regards to the upcoming Scottish elections, I know it'll just be a guess on your part, but are there any areas that you think that people should watch out for particularly misleading claims? I know there's a lot of tension right now throughout the UK over immigration, so I don't know if that would be a major area for disinformation.
Yeah. That's an interesting one, I guess, in the perspective of the Scottish elections, because Scotland obviously doesn't have its own devolved immigration policy. So I'm quite interested to
We've
see
been
if
speaking about this.
yeah, but I'm quite interested to see if this does come to fore as well, because obviously so many of the parties that are running in the Scottish elections are unionist parties. So their, I guess, like umbrella organization is one that in theory could have immigration responsibility in the future. Or does now, I guess, in the case of Labour and Scottish Labour. So yeah, so just from a personal perspective, I just find that really interesting. But I think from a case of things to look out for, we always find during, obviously the first leaders debate is this weekend, or it's, I think every leader has been asked to attend. I don't know if it's been confirmed yet if they will or not, but that's the debate night one on Sunday. What we always find in election campaigns, and we saw this in 2024 with the general election, because obviously the SNP were still doing a lot of like the UK-wide leaders debates as well as like Plaid Cymru and stuff, because they're one of the major parties in the country, was that in election campaigns especially is the reigning party's record is questioned, and rightly so. But that's where we see a lot of claims where it's either the party in government saying we've done this and we've done that, or their opposition party saying you did this and you did that, but obviously picking things that are that don't show them in as good as light as they probably want. So I always think that's an interesting place to start, is when these superlative claims, I guess, whenever a party makes a claim saying criticizing somebody else's record or bigging up their own record, for me that's always like a little flag where I want to check the figures and that I want to check the stats. I want to find out if they've actually done or haven't done the things they've been accused of. So that's maybe one, I guess, like quite basic place to start. I don't know if immigration will come up as a huge talker, but
Well,
you are right. It's obviously been such a big thing, especially in the last like couple of years in the wider political picture, and we have seen a lot of misinformation online about it, and some of that is again going back to posts that we see come up regularly. We see I think we've got a couple of examples online of people saying like, oh, pensioners are entitled to X, Y, and Z support from the government, and people who are immigrants get X, Y, and Z support from the government, like these comparisons. So we do check claims like that. So it's possible things like that might come up. Theoretically, claims like the Scottish government supports immigrants by doing X, Y, and Z, and it supports other people by doing X, Y, and Z. That kind of blueprint of a claim is one that's fairly common, I think. I've not seen it this cycle, but
yeah, I only brought up immigration because I was watching the Sky News broadcast on the upcoming election, and if you look for the comments, there just seems to be a fundamental misunderstanding about what the powers of the Scottish government actually are and what the debate should be about, which I think benefits reform quite a bit, because obviously their whole brand is anti-immigration. So I don't know if that's just almost like a meta misinformation, whether a lot of people in Scotland need just some more basic civic education about what this election should actually be about.
I think that comes down to a matter of opinion, though, because like I was saying, there are a number of pro nationalist, UK-wide parties running for the Scottish elections. So Scottish Labour, for example, might not set its own immigration policy within Scotland, but they are part of the Labour Party itself, which UK-wide does set immigration policy. There's after the last general election, there's a large number of Scottish Labour politicians who are actually MPs now for the UK-wide Labour Party. So I think immigration, even though this specific election, Holyrood doesn't have the powers for immigration, there are representatives who do within Scotland. And also, I suppose if you look at the pro-independence parties as well, they want ultimately to be able to set their own immigration policy. So it does still, I think it justifiably still feeds through into people's things they care about. But there is polling. There's a lot of polling on people in Scotland who've been asked what issues matter the most to you in this election, and there was a YouGov, I think it was a YouGov poll last month, where health was the biggest thing that people wanted to talk about, for example, or at least something they were really thinking about the highest when they're going to be casting their vote. I think education was on there, independence was on there, but so was immigration. So it is something people want to talk about, and people care about.
No, that's a good point. I guess myself, I was just worried that it was drowning out the actual devolved issues. Just also, if anyone's joined this webinar, feel free to put any questions in the chat. I see we've got one attendee, Mark. Nice to see you. But if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll ask them to Nasim. Um, I did want to ask you just about deepfakes. I don't see any positives to the technology whatsoever, and I'm a bit worried. I know your colleague Francis was saying that already there's been a deepfake of an MP somewhere in England, and I don't know if it's going to factor into this election, but do you think do you think there are any positives to this technology, and do you worry that it's going to get better?
I think it's getting trickier. Like I was saying, it's getting
Yeah,
trickier to spot in some ways because they're not the deep fakes are not all coming out with six fingers now. So that
yeah.
so I think it's already gotten better, which makes it does instinctively make it trickier for us. Um yeah, I think we've already found that sometimes things are hard to disprove in some
Hmm.
ways. And audio, deepfake audio is like this particular pinch point because some of it is actually really good. And there's no clear way of being able to identify if it was made with AI. Some of it is still bad, and you can tell it's an AI voice, and the sing song or the weird pauses, or it's we see
Mm.
a lot. Those videos I was talking about before, like those personal freedom ones, a few of those seem to use AI or an impersonator. This is what we always said, we couldn't tell if it was AI. Probably was, but we can't say that definitively. To mimic Keir Starmer's voice. But if you then listen to recordings of his actual voice and then listen to this at the same, not quite the same time, but kind of like noise by noise, if you were, you could pick up quite clearly distortions in the voice, things like the cadence changing. Um, so that made it trickier to, that made it, yeah, we could say it was probably caused by AI, but like I was saying, it doesn't contain that watermark that some images do and some videos do. It doesn't contain obvious errors sometimes that images and
Hmm.
videos are more likely to do. Um, yeah, there's still quite a lot of AI videos, AI generated videos we see where, for example, I worked on one a couple of weeks ago where it was like people saying, "Oh, Boots has this incredible deal on, and it's free, but you just need to pay for postage. And here's somebody with this product." Um, and at first you'd watch that and just think like, "Oh, that's like a lassie in a Boots." And then as you watch the rest of the video, if you looked in the background, you could see like all of the text was distorted and people were kind of like blurring in and out of the background. And that's like a really big hallmark of AI and deep fakes.
Mm.
So we always encourage people to kind of like look out for these little tells, but it is more tricky in audio, definitely. Yeah.
Just looking at recent stats, we've seen that for a lot of young people, I think it's actually for the majority of young people now, under the age of 25 to 30. I can't remember the exact poll, but social media is now their main source of news. With the rise of misinformation, disinformation, AI generated content, do you think that we might actually need to put aside social media and go back to either news websites or reputable sources like newspapers? Do you think we need to put the brakes on a wee bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think the horse is out the stable, right? I don't think it's
Right,
really
yeah.
possible to do that. I know there's like I think other governments in other countries have made more progress than or have achieved done more than we have. I wouldn't necessarily
I,
call it an achievement,
I,
but
I don't mean an outright ban. I just mean as a word of advice, maybe look for your news not just on social media but in other places.
yeah, I mean, we would obviously encourage people to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, newspapers and other sources get it wrong as well. Like
Yeah,
getting
true.
things wrong is a natural part of human life. Like I
Yeah.
get things wrong in my life. People misremember things, people misquote things, people misremember statistics, like people or just people like misread things. People get things wrong. Like we're not when we're sort of speaking to about politicians getting things wrong, we're not always trying to think they've done it with the worst intent behind it.
Hmm.
So yeah, so newspaper, I would just encourage people to think critically about everything they're consuming, which I don't think is asking a ton. If you're not sure about something, we always encourage people, like, a fact that you see online. We always encourage people to like do a bit of research themselves, like do a Google, see if they can find a reputable source for it. It does get tricky because sometimes, if you see a statistic that says like X% of people think this, you might do a quick search for it and then see like, oh yeah, a survey did say this. But then if you dig a bit deeper, you might see like, oh, actually the survey only had 20 respondents. So it would be considered by anybody's perspective, or an official perspective, a representative survey. So it doesn't necessarily say what it's purporting to say, even though it like at first glance it might. So yeah, it gets tricky with social media. We always encourage people to have a look at the account that's maybe sharing the thing. So if it's like an account that was created 2 days ago and has no pictures, or it's got all like strange pictures, or there's no actual clear evidence a living, fully fledged personal personality is behind it, I would probably not share something like that. But if it was like,
Yeah.
for example, from a website that had a social media page and had a verified tick to it and was clearly the official thing for that page, and say I went onto that company's website and they linked specifically to this page, then I would be like, oh, that's a more reputable source. It is trickier, I think, now in the sense that you can buy like verification, you can buy blue ticks on platforms that you couldn't before.
True.
So that sometimes I think does give an air of officialness, or that people might
Social media
misinterpret.
clout.
Yeah, like it is tricky because that used to be a thing where it was like clearly things with blue ticks were like the actual individuals or the actual companies, and then now that's changed even within like the same platform. I think that does make it trickier because yeah, people have to unlearn something that they'd kind of taken for granted for so long.
Mm.
And what are some of the
Just
red flags somebody can look for if they're scrolling? Do you think somebody should just try and fact check every single claim they see, or is there just something they should look out for that should be a red flag that they should try and look into something a bit more?
Um, that's interesting. I think it depends on the person. It depends how much time we have, I think, partly. And it depends on the person. So I think my personal instinct is to be skeptical. So
mm.
I'll read a lot of things online and just be like, I'm not sure if that's true. I'm not sure if that's true. And this is like in my personal life, obviously, as well as like my fact checking work. But if it's my personal life at the weekends, I might just like make a note of it so that later in the week I can take a look at it. Um, if it's something that my friends are talking about, and I've seen online, that's when I'm sometimes a bit skeptical if I don't know the source for it. Um, or if the source for it, I think, is, biased or is coming from one side of the perspective and isn't like the full picture. I think it's reasonable to ask people to check themselves every single thing they read online, especially given how much content there is on social media now. But I think the key thing is if you're sharing it, if you're going to use it going forwards in your life, um, or if it's something that you've read that then changes how you see something or your thoughts on something, I would always just double check to make sure it's true before you accept it as fact. Because otherwise you could believe some really harmful stuff and not one shred of it is based on any actual evidence. If
Mm.
you're just kind of absorbing it like a sponge without thinking critically of it, or at least without checking it, then that's the kind of harm that we try and combat. And yeah, some social media platforms have their own way of doing it. Like I was talking about, Meta has its own systems with fact checkers, at least in the UK, where we can rate posts as false or missing context or partly false or what have you. X has content notes. I know those are kind of written by people, so sometimes there's errors in them, but it's always useful, I think, for social media companies to have that sort of system in play.
Mm. I had one final question that I wanted to ask you. I know that a lot of misinformation tends to sort of be bandied about bubbles online, like Facebook groups, which have a very obvious bias towards one side or the other, or Twitter accounts that have a certain list of followers. Is there any way to really sort of break through that bubble? Like, do you feel like your fact checking reaches the audience that you want it to reach? And is there, to some extent, a point where people don't really care if something is true or not? They just want to believe it.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that's been true of humans forever.
Yeah,
People
true.
have a natural confirmation bias.
It
That's
just it must be difficult with the structure
yeah.
of some social media.
Sometimes it's disheartening, from a
Yeah,
personal perspective, because like I was saying before, it feels sometimes like you're playing whack-a-mole a wee bit. Um,
yeah.
and there's only so much you can do with that. So in terms of, I guess, like reaching the audience, as long as my stuff reaches one person, I don't think about this kind of grand scale. I just think about what's there in front of me. And if,
Mm,
if one person, like say take Facebook system, for example, where it comes up with like a warning label if fact checkers have left a note on something. If that means that people are getting that warning label instead of just seeing the posts consistently, then that to me has done a job already. And then people can click through and still see the original post, and whether they choose to believe the facts or not, that's kind of on them. But and it's really hard to quantify or to count that. But if other people are being protected from the false information, then I think it's done its job and we've done our jobs. And I think at least what I'm concerned with and what I care about is that we now have, as an organization, this bank of truth on our
mm,
website. So,
mm,
people can go to our website and see things that, misinformation they might not have seen naturally, but now they'll know, oh, okay, well, if I see this claim again, I know what to do about it, or I know it's not true, or what have you. And our work is used by other people. So, I know other journalists sometimes use our work. Our work's been referenced by politicians. So we have interventions. So, like I was saying, we'll get in touch with politicians and try and get them to change the record or stop saying something. We'll ask newspapers to edit their pages and correct things that they've gotten wrong. And it doesn't always work, but it does work sometimes. And as long as it's working, at least sometimes, I think we're doing something else right. And but like I was saying as well, this all feeds into the wider aim is you can't just have this like rampant forest of mis and disinformation growing, and you can't
mm,
even it's not even seeing the wood for the trees, it's just seeing like foliage everywhere and you can't break through it. As long as
mm,
there's like at least some people trying to make a path through it, I think
mm.
that's all we can do.